Hello and welcome to Beyond Borders. And in this podcast, we talk about all things global expansion. And we do that by talking to CEOs and founders of businesses who've taken that brave step to go internationally. Sometimes we talk to service providers who help us along our way. And other times we just talk to really cool people that hopefully we can learn from. And in many cases, just like today, somebody that has ticked all those boxes at various times in their career. So please can I introduce today our very special guest, Jody Robie from TalentWorks. Jody, lovely to have you on Beyond Borders.
Oh, thank you so much. Great to see you.
You too, you too. So like to start off really easily. Just give everybody a little bit of background to you, to TalentWorks, and how your sort of career evolved to today, really, if that's okay.
Sure. I'm based in Boston. I am a true Bostonian, which is not a unique thing. We tend to stick close if we've had a good experience, and especially when our sports teams do well and are going to the Super Bowl this year. So hopefully there'll be good results when this ends up being aired. But I've been in the marketing branding space for over 20 years. I started my career on more of the traditional marketing journalism side, and then made a pivot about 20 years ago to support HR clients. And when you think about it, having a journalism degree and understanding what's in it for me as a candidate, why would this be a good place for me to go, becomes very relevant. We certainly didn't know how relevant it would be with global expansion and post COVID. So
Mhm.
I've had the pleasure of working with lots of organizations, small and large, across many different disciplines on scaling, positioning, branding, location studies. And at the end of the day, just being a good partner and have worked for UK headquartered companies for about 14 years and became a shareholder with TalentWorks several years ago, and now we're part of the TXM group.
And that's a really thorough overview and really, really useful. And I guess when Jody and I were talking, given our sort of collective experiences, we thought a great sort of conversation topic today would be given the sort of drive for businesses to operate more globally and internationally, why is it still so hard for us to find the right people today? And we'll sort of just chat through that as we go. And I guess, what one of the things that I find really interesting of some sort of personal experience of this is we sort of decided to take our first big step. Let's use this hypothetical, and we're going to hire our first international employee in the US. What are the things that tend to catch businesses out, Jody?
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the great US, especially when folks they have their perceptions. So, first of all, everyone wants to do New York because they think that's where it is. And then they quickly see the salaries and the cost of living, and they have a bit of a reality check. So, there's some basic differences. Number one, a huge part of the salaries in the US have to cover benefits.
Mhm.
And especially from UK companies, it seems outrageous that this project manager is making 80, $90,000 and they're a couple of years out of university. But you have to remember after taxes and after benefits, it's really not that huge
Mhm.
salary and it's much
Yeah,
more comparable. I think that's a big one. And the
yeah,
benefits is a huge challenge for companies because that's a make it or break it for that talent. I also think, when you look at different countries, and I know, Brazil, it's all about is it a name brand? And, other countries, you need to have a company car. I think in the US, it's about safety. I think there's been a lot of generational shifts where people have seen their parents get laid off. We've had highs and lows in the economy. So when you look at someone, whether they're millennial or Gen X, they've been burned by
mhm,
risk. So I think if you're going to find that first employee, you need to find the person that has that entrepreneurial spirit.
yeah. And does that change the expectations on the candidate side as well? So, it's a really useful and interesting lens to say as the company, as the hire, it appears really expensive. What about from the candidate's point of view?
I think and even for ourselves, as we started to scale in the US, 12 years ago, there were a couple things I would say. Number one is I would say, how are you early morning? because you need to have somebody who's going to be okay with checking their email, not necessarily always being on calls, but you can't roll in at 9:30. It's already 2:30 UK
Yeah.
time and the day is gone. Nothing's happening. So it's the mindset. And I think what's also very different, there are many, many people in the US who've had great careers that have never had a global experience, much different than other parts of the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's the positive of that. I think there's a huge attraction. And when we're outreaching to candidates for those first GM roles, it is have a chance to live in wherever it is and be part of a global team. And I think once you have the taste of that, which I've had, like, you don't want to go back to working for a domestic company if that's the excitement you like. I think that the other part of it is understanding that you have to have that independence because things happen when it's evening over at headquarters. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give is that organizations come to scale in the US and they feel we can send our founder over, we don't need a senior person. That's the biggest mistake
Yeah.
I have seen because when it's 12:15 on a Friday Eastern time, and the website goes down or somebody has a challenge or a client is upset and everybody is off the clock, you want someone with a little bit of business acumen at that point.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the advice we've been giving that to
Mhm.
people to say, scale up a little bit. It might be a little bit more money, but trust me, it's going to save you in the long run.
And when we and that's really useful, and we're looking at the sort of cost factor there, and then the sort of the types of workers you need, and we follow this hypothetical. We all like to think our business and our brands are universally appealing as well. And so when we enter any market and say, hey, come and work for me, that automatically people will fall over themselves
Right.
to do that. I assume that's not always the case when you think about employer branding.
No, and I think employer branding's become even more relevant than it was, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was getting people over the line to say it's okay to have a career website. Believe it or
Mhm.
not, people were afraid to show that they were hiring and that their customers wouldn't want to do work with them if they were looking for salespeople or looking for engineers.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's changed quite a bit. I think right now it's about the authenticity of why work here, because good employer brand is going to give you a couple things. It's going to position you how you want to be positioned, but it's also going to be a tool to let the wrong person with the right profile select out. So you
Yeah.
can have a brilliant engineer who likes to go off in the corner and do their work. And it's a collaborative organization that wants to have teamwork and partnership. Save yourselves a lot of time and be clear of what the expectation
Yeah.
is. Used to be about dress code, used to be about days in the office, and that's coming back, the days in the office piece.
Hmm.
But really, does this organization fit what I'm interested in my job? And if it's remote, mobile remote, if I'm in my pajamas in my kitchen, it's either going to be calm, it's going to be the interesting work, or it's going to be the ideals and the values of the organization. So, more than anything, that's really important to have some clarity on today. And it could be an agile lift. It doesn't need to be something that takes 2 years to do because it's going to
Yeah.
probably be different in 18 months anyway.
And I think in my experience, when you're doing it for the first time, a lot of unconscious bias happens. Silly little things. You forget. It's similar to having a remote worker. The first time you have a remote worker, you send an email out to say, "Hey, there's cakes in the kitchen." Oh, except for you because you can't get to the office. And then it's like that, but on a global scale, where you're going to now to think about time zones and think about that, and I listened to you deliver a talk in Boston, and you used the phrase, "It's a lot more complicated than turning S's into Z's," and I really like that. It really resonated with me. It's like we speak the same language, but we don't. We're very different at the same time, especially when looking at the cultural dynamics of UK and US businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I give a quiz to employees, an acronym quiz or language quiz, because you have enough weird acronyms between ATS and RPO and MSP, just on the HR side. And then you throw in British versions
Yeah,
of words. Even the greetings, you get on a phone call and your British colleagues will say, "Are you all right?" And the US team's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." Like, "Why did you think I'm not all right?" Instead of a welcome or, there's a different perception of rudeness because, um, what the UK thinks is rude, the Americans thinks is just being
Yeah,
direct and vice
yeah,
versa.
yeah,
I always say to my team, "How are you about receiving very direct emails at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning?" Because, um, they are very direct, which is what I like, but it's not sugar coated.
yeah,
Americans tend to not necessarily say directly what they mean, and the
hmm,
UK tends to do that. And you go cross countries. You
yeah,
also have those same nuances even within a large
yeah.
country like the
State
US
to state, yeah,
because even within the difference. I always say when we've helped companies that are scaling and they might be east coast and they're looking to Florida or the south
hmm,
or the west coast, it's actually more of a cultural change to try to get US folks being managed from Boston or New York to manage a California team than it is to have a UK east
yeah,
coast relationship. And those are the things that are really hard to know when you're not physically in the market. AI can give you some nice tools of like, hey, where should I have an office or
yeah,
what are the benefits of being here? But that's where that local expertise for those windows of time is what I enjoy doing. Even for
yeah,
US clients, being able to say, hey, we need to understand, we want to map out which of these markets would be the best place to build these types of skills. Did a project a few years back for Shopify and it was global. It was
hmm,
Ottawa, San Diego, Krakow. And what what type of talent is there? That's easy to find, but who else is looking for that talent
yeah.
is not so easy. And then, oh, by the way, what's the perception of us in that market before we go and invest and decide to go? So that little bit of insight up front makes a massive difference of not making a bad decision.
Another common mistakes that businesses make, I think of one of the ones I was involved from a global perspective. And it's great to want to have a global leadership team and everybody to be on these calls. But when you've got UK, US, and I think we had Atlanta, and then everybody in between, there was always a paper, scissors, rock for who's going to have the really uncomfortable time zone. And,
Yeah.
and in an attempt to be inclusive, you're actually creating a really poor proposition for somebody that has to be up at 3 a.m. or still working at 12 p.m. at night rather than change the way you work to actually have slightly different communication standards, which might give you a better employer brand in that country.
Yeah. No, when I think back, there's a couple examples where there's good intentions and perceptions and then the reality. So, you know, Primark, obviously a great name in the
Hmm.
UK, not known in the US, did their research and they actually came and purchased uh, a historic landmark, Filene's Basement, which is right downtown Boston. People from far and wide go to shop there. So they were very smart in that decision. They made a perception that there's also the largest number of colleges and universities within Boston proper, hundreds of colleges and universities. So their model across the world has been college students will come, they'll work.
Hmm.
That is not the case here because those college students are spending 80 to $100,000 to go to Boston University or MIT or Northeastern.
Yeah,
Those kids are not working at Primark.
yeah,
So those are things that, a quick conversation with someone with local knowledge and saying, well, who else can we get? Can we have the underemployed? Can we do that? So being able to be involved in those conversations, that's a mistake. Sometimes the data doesn't speak for itself. You need that native language.
yeah,
Um, and I do think that one of the surprises that hits companies is everyone is, especially entrepreneurial businesses that are scaling, they're very excited about their model. And they're very excited of keeping that transparency of like, we are a UK company or we're a Dutch company. I mean, even back in the day where, companies were sort of novel that they weren't based in the US, what was pride of keeping the website in that native tongue or using sort of Canadian or British English, that does turn off candidates that are
yeah,
afraid they're just going to be, to your point, an appendage. To
yeah,
answer your question, though, about the technology and the time differences, I think we're in a different place. There is no reason why you need to have someone do a call at 2 a.m. when you can record on Teams or Zoom or send an AI summary and then do a
Yeah.
follow up call mid group. And I think more companies are having to do that because it's just not respectful. I
Yeah.
think the remote work also works works better. So people might have 2 to 6 off if they have to go on at 8 p.m. call, and that you couldn't really do when everyone was in the office. So I
Yeah.
think we're slowly getting there.
And so that sort of segues nicely then into, and I completely agree, by the way, that sort of just using data to help you establish where your sort of land and expand might be. It's sort of, it can be useful as well as, but having that local knowledge, those conversations, really sort of ingraining your business into the local cultures got to help as well. And so we're sort of thinking about moving our business in, and there's, you know, most businesses probably face that dilemma of, do I send somebody over or do I hire locally? And do you see that working better or worse in each case? And do you have advice for people on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple things that happened during COVID. So just to take a step back and, hopefully someday we won't be talking about it, but it's still affecting the market today. For the first time, you couldn't send that person from Europe
Yeah.
to Detroit or vice
Hmm.
versa. And amazingly, for the organizations that had meaningful work, like Moderna was one of our clients at the time, you got over it. Moderna's about 10 miles from me. Um, they're headquartered in Massachusetts. And, they basically had to quickly go from a couple hundred people to a couple thousand people and have a brand. They were pre-commercial. And instead of taking a year to go through focus groups and strategy and figure out the messaging, they had to go. So I think getting quickly and getting ready to go. When you're looking for talent, you have to ask yourself, am I so sure what's the right answer? So my advice is put together the profile of what you're looking for and find a partner that's going to be able to go on the journey of having a little flexibility on that. Because it might be that there isn't anybody in the US that's going to be a good fit at that level, but maybe the level below to sort of
Hmm.
be that operational leader. And then the C suite comes over on a regular basis. Or, one example, there was a organization that was looking for legal counsel. This was similar to what I mentioned before, where they wanted somebody with retail experience. They wanted somebody who maybe 5 to 7 years experience, and it was a European company. And you know, no attorney is going to handle that by themselves in a
Yeah.
remote office when half the day there's no other support. And being able to sort of walk through that and give sort of the profiles of, here are people that fit. Right now, there's so much talent in the market that if you post a job on LinkedIn, you might get 600 responses
Yeah.
and maybe 1 or 2% are worthy. So my advice is just take the time and find someone to just go and do the search. You know what you need. And then as an organization, you can figure out, maybe this person complements my senior person that is in the different country, so that we're not replacing with the same, but they're helping each other. Do they have the vendor relationships? Do they understand the law? Do they understand the HR restrictions of what's different from California to Michigan? There's a lot of complexities. US is like 50 different countries. And there are things that are just going to be easier having feet on the ground.
Yeah.
It may or may not need to be the most senior person, but I think from a new business development standpoint, Americans like to know there's Americans that they can trust.
Yeah.
So I do feel that that first salesperson is often really helpful to be native.
And, and one of the things that sort of probably means businesses flip between those two things is like the hearts and minds element, that you want to create the version of your business where people have a connection to that organization and care about that organization. And so to almost have an element of seniority there that can then sort of by osmosis have everybody that comes in absorb that happens. And one of the things that I found interesting when first sort of hiring in the US is the how potentially the concept of at will employment changes that based in the sort of UK. You know, in the UK, you might have 3 jobs your entire 30, 40-year career. And then actually this concept of at will employment, is there a mismatch where organizations are expecting somebody to fall in love with the business and be there for 10 to 15 years, but actually, why would they when the contract doesn't afford them the rights to do that as well?
I think that's a really valid difference. So I'm going to take it from the side of the recruiting partner for a minute. So when someone needs to find the right person in the UK, there's obviously massive amount of due diligence and then figuring out, oh, are they replacing somebody? So maybe we've done sort of, a confidential search, and then we have to go back and look at garden leave and the expense and going through the cycles. You don't have to do any of that in the US. It's basically, Andrew, not working out. Sorry, here's your severance. 2 weeks. See you later, which seems appalling
Mhm.
to
Yep.
European companies. However, from the recruiting standpoint, if you find somebody who appears to be the right person at the right time, you can hire them.
Yeah, yeah.
And if
Yep.
they don't work out, you can
Mhm.
fire them.
Yeah.
And it's when businesses hold on too long and they want to have a comparison of 2 or 3 people, they lose out because
Yeah.
the candidates also expect a cycle to move pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And especially when you're going in and sourcing someone, which is what, these positions need that active sourcing. You want to find the right person that is going to have the cultural fit, the experience, the willingness to be that entrepreneurial leader, to kind of hold their ground. And, they might be filling the coffee pot, even though they're the, you know, chief HR officer. I
Yeah.
always say I was very, very highly paid to, check the mailbox, the PO
Yeah.
box when we started. So those things are really hard to tell from an advert. And my advice is, don't be so worried about making a mistake.
Mhm.
Mistakes happen, but in the US, it's very easy to shift and change if that
Yeah.
right person, and maybe that right person, it's not the right job for them. You love them, but they just are tired of like not getting responses in the afternoon, and they just don't have the personality to to continue even though they thought they did.
Yeah. And that happens the other way as well, doesn't it?
Of
You know, the
course.
US businesses looking to create operations in Europe as well are suddenly saddled with lots and lots of responsibilities that culturally and sort of legally they're not used to potentially navigating as well.
I mean, I think there's sort of that rumor perception, right? People are afraid in the US to, they hear Germany's really hard and France is impossible. And,
Mhm.
and again, I think you need to do things on a case by case basis. I do think there is a shift though from the last sort of 2 to 3 years that I'm seeing more organizations want to bring people back, even if it's in a pod or if in a small office, because they do feel like that culture piece is missing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really hard to do. It was exciting when everyone could say, "Hey, we can fill these 5 roles in 5 different states because they're gonna be cheaper salaries."
Mhm.
But if you're trying to build a team and that team's not even in the same time zone and they're having challenges internally just on whatever domestic group you're working with, I do find like it's just everybody is in this like year of performance. It's do more with less. It's we don't need this extra headcount. We don't need this extra tool. So you really need to have the right people who are buying into what you
Yeah.
want to accomplish. And back to employer brand, back to being clear on expectations, looking at training and development. Do you have people that have 80% of the skill? Do you change the job title? Do you find somebody else to scaffold them or do you
Yeah.
train them? And that's what I think people are having to look at now.
And there's a real intersection, isn't there, between sort of global recruitment and staffing, performance management, and the debate of how many days remote is good now versus what people need versus sort of cultural dynamics. And they all segue into each other. And
Uh,
they're even harder to sort of rationalize when it's your first employee in a new country as well, because you're sort of, for as much as you want to, the reality is if that person's working remotely, if that person's in a small office on their own, they're still on their own.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the rule of thumb is making a person who's running a function by themselves go into an office with lots of people in a different
Yeah.
function that's what you see in Glassdoor. And those are
Yeah.
the people that get very frustrated, and they're ripe for the picking. I think you want to find the person that is excited about what you want to build. So I do think there's some merit to say we're going to be a fully remote organization, but we're going to have come together weeks or come together
Yeah.
days. And I've seen companies like, Grammarly would do a come together week. I think it was like every 6 weeks. And so you would all be in an office. It could be the Berlin office, it could be the San Francisco office, it could be the New York office, but it was meaningful time together,
Yeah.
productive time together, and then flexibility the rest. Seen organizations do like, hey, this is the week or two we're in. I do feel that CEOs are feeling uncomfortable with the lack of sort of, it's not accountability because people are doing the work, the lack of cultural temperature.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing with a global team is how are you really feeling? Like we're having this hour conversation, but after we hang up, are you sitting there like with your hands in your head because you just don't know how you're going to make those sales targets? Whereas if you're in an office, you can sort of see the body language. And I think
Yeah.
that, global businesses, we've all been on Teams calls and Zoom for years. It's the folks that this is new to. It's really difficult. You're also missing those drive-by conversations. So whether it's remote, whether it's bringing in a leader, whether it's doing some sort of, hey, we're going to have these weeks together once a quarter, I think being clear about that as part of the employer
Yeah.
brand message is really important to say, here's our expectation. We want you, we need you to be independent, but we commit to having you get together with us a couple times a year so you don't feel isolated.
Yeah.
And then continue that.
And I think that's certainly a trend I'm seeing this side of the pond, that back to the office, people immediately jump to 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, stuck in traffic jams for 2 hours a day. And actually, what I think will stay is more flexibility. I think that technology now enables employees and employers to be able to complete their work over an elongated schedule. So if you can afford somebody flexibility, and the give back from that is there are more days in the office at core times or scheduled times in the month, in the
Exactly.
year,
Yeah.
we all get the best of both worlds then, and I refer to it in my leadership team as putting into the well and taking out of the well. And this might not resonate with people, but from the CEO perspective, it's sort of switched a little bit where people start by demanding to take out of the well significantly. I want to work 3 days a week. I want two of those to be Starbucks, one of those from Costa. I'll come to here to do that. I'll do this. I'll do this. It's like, okay, I'm giving, I'm giving before there's been any sort of putting into the well from there. And I think that's just about finding a balance, and hopefully we'll, I sometimes say I think we're the generation that will make all the mistakes, and the next one will, if you think about our children, they've studied half on site and half remote. They're traveling around. They're just used to a more collaborative, engaged, bite-sized world, aren't they?
Oh,
Really?
yeah. And they're just, I agree, but I think what you've said is true. I think that this sort of last few years, we went from lots of layoffs and then sort of post-COVID, overhiring, overpaying for people, just so excited about the war on talent. And then guess what? A pretty big reset in the last 2
Yeah.
years, often because it's not even just because of financial needs. It's almost like that bravado to say, look at what we're doing on a lean and mean team.
Yeah.
Or let me correct that I paid these people with 6 years experience $250,000 and they don't have the strategy and they can't have a phone call with anybody. So we made a mistake. So let's just clear this out. I
Okay.
think that being clear of the expectations. So one of the things I'm seeing as a big trend is this last sort of 12 months is not only sort of repositioning the EVP, but really looking at the company values. You know, if the values are, trust, accountability, etc., that's one thing. If the values are tied to using AI, um, independence, collaboration, values used to just be sort of fluff on the wall, but I do feel like values is becoming really important to
Yeah.
just be
Yeah.
clear and say, this is what I want you to put into the well. I'm going to pay you
Mhm.
well. I'm going to give you Starbucks. I'm going to do everything you said from the CEO standpoint. But in return, I need to know that you're committed to do these things. And it's
Yeah.
not always about a financial goal. It's about working as a team. It's about um, being willing to try new things. And I think every company, every organization is struggling with that right now because there's so much pressure of delivering. The economy is in an unusual position. um, I'm finding the pace of doing business is slow because people are very unsure about, you know, am I going to be in this role? Am I going to admit that I need help? Are we willing to do that expansion now? What's happening with our countries? What's the U.S. going to do next with tariffs? I mean, so there's a lot of
Yeah.
uncertainty, and I think if you at least can control what you can control, which is to your point, your own employees and your expectation, that's half the battle.
And that's the beauty of these types of conversations, podcast, and speaking to people like you, Jody, because there'll be people now all around the world saying, "That's me, and it gets us there's a sort of nice reassurance to understand that there are other business leaders and owner managed executives who have made that first step, who are feeling like that. I think, this is happening in lots of different businesses in lots of different countries. There's a warmth you get from that really as well. Yeah. Which
Yeah,
segues nicely sort of back into, okay, let's go through that hypothetical. You've helped us talent map the market. Our first employee's gone great. We're now a UK, US powerhouse, and we go, great. We're going to do this in lots of other countries. How does that change? When you are multiple territory talent
hmm
strategy,
hmm
what's the sort of advice you have for businesses who are at that stage of their growth?
So I think doing that mapping to really think about, and it's fascinating because I think again we have perceptions that Amsterdam's a place for this technical talent,
Yeah.
or that Ireland is going to give you these types of skills. But some of us have been in this game for a while. So guess what? Things have changed in the last 5 to 10 years.
Hmm.
So, I'm even seeing things like people moving out of Poland, which was like the big hot answer, 7, 8 years ago, because guess what? That's getting to be sort of saturated and expensive in areas. So I do think it is worth separating out. These are the functions and the skills that we need. This is where we're growing in the next level of, either
Hmm.
we're getting this financing or we know that we're going to have to, or, especially in pharma and biotech, we're at phase 3, we're going to go commercial. So we need to build out that sales team. So I think there are very smart ways to figure out to not only fish where the fish are, but make sure you're finding the right fish.
Yeah.
So, is it looking at competitors and understanding like where are those good folks that you might want to convert to come and be your leader for that team? Um, it's very easy to do research, like we said, and say, here's the salaries, here's the market, this makes sense. But really saying, okay, in this part in Basel, Switzerland, there are a lot of people there that I think have done this work before, and they might be willing to make that change now. So let's test the waters. And the testing is useful. Before you set up shop, before you're, calling you to sort of get you set up in that country, let's do a couple of countries and a couple of markets and
Hmm.
see what bears. It might be doing a programmatic campaign to just get express interest. It might be doing some confidential outreach to say, by the way, if there was a company here, would you be interested in this role?
Yeah.
How much would it cost for you to come? What are you looking for? Why would you leave? That's really important before you sort of just make a decision in a
Yeah.
boardroom.
And that sort of feels like a really nice opportune time to sort of give you a little moment just to talk about talent works and the way they can help businesses who are struggling with these questions or sort of opportunities as well.
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I've been at TalentWorks now for 12 years. When I joined, we were, about 40 people. I was the first sort of official American leader. And before I took the position, and I had known Neil Purcell, our CEO, because I was a client of theirs, I went around to my network and said, this seems unique and different. They're really smart people. They look at things in a different way. It's not just a database of candidates. It's not just executive search. It's not just, managing contracts. Would you be interested in something like this? A little bit more of the market intelligence and insight, as well as solving the problem. And my CEOs and CHROs said, yeah, it sounds interesting. And I never looked back. And
Yeah.
so our business has grown in many different ways in that time. And I think at the core of what we do, it's really being that trusted partner. So in some cases, like the scenarios we're talking about, it's helping that organization scale. So do they need help identifying, what does our org chart look like? Where would these people be? Can we go out and find those people? Because we're not going to compete with well-known brands if we just do advertising or we go to
Hmm.
a headhunter or search firm. Often search firms will say, oh, I found this great person, Andrew, and I'm just going to shop him around to all of these companies and see. That's not how we work. We work exclusively to say we're going to go and find the person that wants to come and work for Briars. So that RPO executive search support offers a nice bridge, especially as you're going from 10 or 20 employees to 100 or
Yeah.
120. The biggest thing that we can offer is CEOs need to be running their business, as you know. Leadership teams should be running their business, not acting as recruiters at 6:30 at night trying to go through their network and do phone calls. So there needs to be a bridge before you're ready to build out that internal HR team. And often we'll do that. We'll do that sort of setup, that first rounds of hiring, and then actually bring in the first head of comp, head of TA, and then work as a support. So that's one area that I really enjoy. The employer brand part falls in neatly because if you don't know why you want to work
Yeah.
somewhere, how do we do that? And having a full agency internally of creative designers, motion graphics, we know how to read brand standards. We're not going to be conflicting with your marketing team who wants to help but doesn't have time. Has been massively helpful to do, awareness campaigns and just build out some awareness and even down to job descriptions. And then that all fits neatly under that workforce. So our managed service providing is how are you actually keeping track of your employees? As down the road, you're in that 10, $20 million of spend, you've contractors around the world. Do you know who you're using? Do you know what you're spending? Have you it fits in that sort of spot between procurement, a pain in the neck hiring manager just complains and says, I want a contractor, and you times that by 1,000,
Yeah.
no one
And
has any idea what's being spent. So
and
being able
across
to offer
multiple
that.
countries, that becomes even harder as well because
Exactly.
nobody's got it. And then the regulation impact of getting that wrong as well, it can be a real minefield.
So I think that in summary, we are a great partner for someone who realizes I need some expertise. It's not that I don't know how to do this, but I don't have the time
Yeah.
or the global expertise to do it efficiently and quickly. And those are the clients we love to work with. And sometimes we work with clients on projects, and sometimes it's 12 years. So I'm always open to having those conversations and partnering with the likes of you and everybody else because it's a very challenge. I've never seen the talent market this way. It's
Yeah.
really, really hard to find that right person and say what you need to say to them, and that's what we've been doing for a long time.
And and for people who want to get in touch with you or Talentworks directly, where can they find you?
So easiest ways to find me is on LinkedIn or on our TalentWorks website. So it's talent-works.com. We're going to be doing a new branding, so that's going to have some promotion out in the next few weeks. LinkedIn, it's Jody, Jody Robie at LinkedIn, and certainly open to having conversations with anybody.
Thank you so much. And such a great conversation and one that's pertinent to so many businesses at now as well, at all different sizes. Huge. What once was reserved for sort of blue chip corporates is now open to all businesses, all shapes and sizes. And so, there's arguments to say it's more important at the smaller size of the business to get those cultural dynamics right. And just I'll ask you to give some sort of just quick fire top tips in a second. But if I try to summarize what the sort of things we've talked about today, I think when we're hiring across borders, it's so much more complicated than just finding the talent. It's understanding the market, the culture, the competitive landscape, the sort of pressures that are there. I think the university and the affluent area sort of example you used before was a great one. And as you move out of your own domestic region into other regions, making sure that you have a global strategy that sort of plugs into those local expectations. And if you get that right, this global talent pool is there and available. But if you get it wrong, it can be really expensive and time consuming. Ever was that a useful? Was that how accurate was that summary?
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I mean, I think today it's overwhelming what needs to get done
Yeah.
for leaders. And, I vice chair an organization here in Boston called the Women's Edge. So we have a top 100 women led CEOs awards, and I do a lot of work with them, and regardless of the size, whether it's profit, nonprofit, the people strategy is one that is always there. And there's always pressure. And it is not a job for one person.
Yeah.
You can't just tack that on to an HR leader and
Yeah.
expect them to do that. So
It's not an extra thing on your to-do list
no,
and expect it to go well, is it?
no, so my advice would be, don't be afraid to have a conversation with someone that surprisingly might be able to save you time and money and get you to where you need to go quickly, not to replace an HR
Mhm.
team, but to enhance and keep your
Yeah.
good employees not overwhelmed. And that's what I'm seeing the companies that realize, I just don't want to keep piling on to the lean and mean team. I want to have some of these things done for them so they can be working on what I want.
Yeah.
And even when you're going country to country, it's having that slight adaptation is really makes it feel more authentic. Like you
Yeah.
actually do care about people in Ireland because you've made a little comment here that only would be relevant here in the
Yeah.
market. And those little nuances make a big
Yeah.
difference.
Important. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed that. It's always great to have a conversation and full disclosure. I've referred Jody and TalentWorks into our client base as well. So, please do get in touch with Jody if that sounds like a service that would be interesting. But thank you so much. And to everybody that listening, thank you very much. And until next time, keep pushing those businesses beyond borders. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to see you.